Welcome to CTV News Trendline with Michael Stittle and Nik Nanos.
Nik, we're almost at election night, and I think it's the perfect time for our election night cheat sheet. Everything our audience needs to know when the results start coming in. I just want to start off with the big one for me is the difference between popular support and vote efficiency.
Yeah, 100%, Michael. The thing is yes, there's the popular vote, which is what pollsters measure. Like every night with CTV News and the Global Mail, we're estimating the percentage of Canadians that are going to be voting for all the different federal parties. But what really matters is seats in the House of Commons. And the thing is in the first past the post system, most times, there's a disconnect. Think of it this way, Michael. Like when was the last time a party won with more than 51% popular support? A really long time. But the thing is they're able to generate majorities. The thing is, and this is what's critical to remember, is that in the last two federal elections, the Conservatives garnered more votes. Andrew Scheer garnered more votes than Justin Trudeau. Aaron O'Toole garnered more votes than Justin Trudeau. On a percentage basis, they had higher support. Both of those Conservative leaders had higher support than the Liberals. However, the Liberals were able to form a government. Why? Because of the distribution of Conservative support. There are parts of the country, primarily the prairies, where the Conservatives have a 20, 25, 30%, 30 percentage point advantage. And it's wasted votes. So their national number looks good, but then when you try to convert it into seats, it's very different. It's kind of like, Michael, it's kind of like the US election where, Donald Trump was able to win the Electoral College handily, but when you look at the popular support, it was actually much closer. So I think that's one of the key things that we have to remember, that when we talk about the race tightening, it has to do with the percentage support for the parties. It does not have to do and is not directly connected or convert into the proportion of seats that each of the parties win being close.
Nik, Elections Canada said we had a huge increase in advance polling turnout over the Easter long weekend, 25% increase, I believe. Who has an advantage with that, do you think?
Well, traditionally, the Conservatives have an advantage in the advance polls because they are very well organized and they deliver their vote. There have been a number of instances where the Conservatives, because they're so good at being organized and getting their own supporters out, that it's put them over the top in ridings that they were trailing when the live votes are being called, but then counted. But when the advance polls are counted in those ridings, they actually vault ahead of the Liberals. But the big question is a lot of the advanced voting was done on a holiday weekend, which means there's probably an opportunity for younger people to also vote at the same time. We know from the polling that the Conservatives do exceptionally well, actually better than the Liberals among voters that are under 35 years of age. The big question is will there be an advantage for one party over another? Traditionally, it would be the Conservatives. We don't know whether they'll still have the advantage in the advanced polls, but what we're seeing now, at least, is both Conservative supporters and Liberal supporters are highly motivated. And I think this has to do with the fact that when it comes to the popular support, there's only a handful of percentage points between the two frontrunners. So traditionally, this favors the Conservatives. That, again, we don't know because this is not a traditional election because of the focus on the Liberals and the Conservatives, and this really being one of the biggest two-way races that we've seen in almost a generation of elections.
Nik, we also often talk about battleground ridings as key indicators of where the night might be going. Is there anywhere in particular Canadians should be watching for?
Yeah, I've really got my eye on the 905 GTA ridings, the Mississauga, Bramptons, Oakvilles, those ridings. They tend to swing with whoever the party is that forms a government. Right now, the Liberals are doing well, but we have to remember, for example, in those ridings, just in the last provincial election, Premier Doug Ford, the Progressive Conservative leader, swept all those, did very well in all those ridings. And we're in a world now where those exact same voters now are currently leaning towards the Liberals. So I'm watching the GTA because if one party gets the advantage in those ridings, the Mississauga, Bramptons, Oakvilles, and stuff like that, that's probably an early indicator of who has the upper hand. And the The other one to watch is really British Columbia. British Columbia, in terms of popular support, is a tight race between the Conservatives and the Liberals. The NDP are back on their heels. The NDP are going to lose seats in BC. We don't know how many, but because of those vote splits, right now the vote splits are favoring the Liberals. But if there's a minor change over the weekend in British Columbia, some of those ridings that the Liberals are poised to pick up at the expense of the New Democrats could actually create opportunities for the Conservatives. So I've got my eye on British Columbia too.
Nik, you did a study for CTV News and the Globe and Mail recently on how first generation and second generation immigrants tend to vote. What did you learn?
Yeah, this was really cool. We wanted to get an idea of people talk about diaspora politics, people that are new Canadians and who do they support? Who do they not support? What are their political preferences? And in the survey that we did with CTV News and the Globe and Mail, and when we profiled and looked at how people said that they were going to be voting or what parties that they were going to support in the election and on the leadership front, who they preferred, a pretty significant difference. If someone was an individual that was born in Canada and whose grandparents were born in Canada, they were much more likely to vote conservative. Actually, just among that part of the nation, it was a statistical dead heat between the Liberals and the Conservatives. However, when you look at first and second generation immigrants and stuff like that, the Liberal advantage kind of widened from 4 percentage points to 10 percentage points. So the thing is something like that helps the Liberals at least, and it means that places like Montreal that have significant immigrant first and second generation individuals living in Montreal, places like Toronto, places like the GTA that have a significant first and second generation Canadian immigrant kind of population. Right now, at least, they're favoring the Liberals. But what we have to say is we have to remember in the past, when Stephen Harper was successful, it's because the Conservatives under Stephen Harper, and why don't we just add Jason Kenney into the mix, that Jason Kenney was a big part of Stephen Harper's winning strategy to tap into those diaspora communities. And, when the Conservatives did well among diaspora communities, that usually pointed to a Conservative victory. So right now, the research is favoring the Liberals when it comes to diaspora communities. And those happen to be in critical battlegrounds like the 905 and also in the Lower Mainland in British Columbia.
Nik, this 36-day campaign, we're nearly at the end, has been a wild ride as usual. I want to go through some of the highlights and some of the vulnerabilities we've seen for the major parties. Starting off with the debate, did you see any really strong standout performance that may have moved the dial?
I think the debate kind of reinforced the views of people that already had a particular inclination that for those Canadians that like Pierre Poilievre, they thought that he won the debate and that he did a really good job. He did land some punches for sure on Mark Carney. For those that have inclinations toward the Liberals, they probably thought that Mark Carney did good enough in the French debate and managed to get through the English debate. But I didn't really see any breakout moments. We did notice for a couple nights after the French and English debates a little bit of a minor uptick for Jagmeet Singh and his personal numbers, and for the New Democrats. Probably the scrappy Singh that we saw during the debates helped him a little bit. But after that little bit of a debate lift, and that was a small lift for the New Democrats and Jagmeet Singh, they basically have kind of gone back back to where they were before, where their support was at around 8% or thereabouts.
For Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, he had that massive rally. I think he was saying something like 15,000 people showed up in Edmonton. It was really quite something. That was a definite big moment for him. Does that have a lasting impact, do you think, on the campaign?
Oh, I think it has a massive impact on the mood of the Conservative campaign and also the mood of Conservative voters. The thing is that it kind of makes sense. If you go to these Conservative rallies, you see the mood, you see the feeling, you see the kind of how, what's going on, and not a big surprise. You think this looks and feels like a winning campaign, and you know what? In any other election, it would be a winning campaign. The thing is that we have the Conservatives in the high 30s. and they've been in the high 30s for, a number of nights throughout the campaign. In any other world, that would be enough to form a majority government. You know what, Michael? If like 2 years ago, if 2 years ago, Pierre Poilievre, and I know we don't have politicians on the podcast, but if Pierre Poilievre was joining us and I'd said, you know, Mr. Poilievre, I have some good news and bad news for you. 3 days before election day, you're going to be at 38 or 39% support. That's the good news. The bad news is it won't be enough to win the election. I'm sure his head would explode, right? And so, the thing is, but in this world where the NDP are down, the Bloc are down, the People's Party is also down compared to the last election, that 38, 39%, which is usually a number that's good enough to form a government, is not good enough. So for those folks that go to these rallies, these conservative rallies, and they see this energetic mood, well, yeah, because they should be feeling as good or better than they have been in 10, 15, 20 years. Because, the last time the Conservatives were at this level was when Stephen Harper formed a majority government, and that's more than a decade ago. So not a big surprise that there's a bit of that disconnect. But what those Conservative supporters don't see is the collapse and drop of all those other parties, and that the Liberals are in the low 40s, and that being the game changer in terms of the potential outcome of the campaign.
Nik, for Liberal leader Mark Carney, obviously this is his very first federal election campaign. I feel like he really kind of hit his stride near the end after the Conservatives released their costed platform, and it really played to his strengths. Listen to this.
Today, I'm proud to launch Canada Strong. Our plan to unite, to secure, to protect and build Canada. That's what it means to have a government that spends less so that Canadians can invest more. That's what it means. That's what it means. To act with the urgency that this crisis requires, to match the scale of the crisis with the scale of ambition in this great country.
So what did you make of his performance?
I think, for Mark Carney, he wants to talk about money, finances, the fiscal situation. Like, that's his strength. He's an economist by training. And so, I think he welcomes every opportunity to talk about things like that, just because of his academic and professional background. And I think he feels probably more comfortable talking about those things than other stuff. And, for the Conservatives, you have to think of the Conservatives as wanting to kind of put forth a fiscal platform that is driven based on a view of where they want to take the government and where they want to take the country. And you have to think of Carney as the guy that, yeah, he's good to talk about those things. And he'd be happy to kind of try to poke holes in the Conservative platform. But, I think in that particular situation, it's a fairly even trade-off.
Nik, in terms of vulnerabilities for Poilievre and Carney, I think a lot have been made about internal strategists fighting, Jenny Byrne versus Corey Teneycke in the Conservative camp. How do you think they handled that?
It's kind of a surreal world where Doug Ford actually may be shaping and influence Pierre Poilievre's destiny. For Corey Teneycke, when Jenny Byrne, the senior advisor to Pierre Poilievre, and Corey Teneycke, who's the senior political advisor to Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford, who's the progressive conservative leader in Ontario, when they kind of have whatever you want to call it, the bickering, that's one thing. I think when the Premier of Ontario, who is I'll call it a conservative, the leader of the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario, makes disparaging remarks about the Conservative National Campaign not being effective, saying things like, yeah, the truth hurts, that they're not doing a very good job, not openly endorsing the Conservative leader of Canada in the election. I think that sends a signal to Ontario. Ontario is is the big prize in this, just because of the number of seats there. And you'd think maybe you would not expect an effusive endorsement, but you would not expect a Conservative Party leader in a major province like Ontario, to make openly disparaging remarks about the National Conservative Campaign. And I think that has an impact on volunteers, organization on the ground in Ontario. And think of it this way: if Doug Ford had openly and positively endorsed Pierre Poilievre, I think that would have been a game changer for the Conservatives in Ontario, and probably a game changer for Pierre Poilievre and his political fortune. So why don't we just put this: whatever happens at this election will be, Doug Ford will be a key player. And let's say the Conservatives win. Let's say the Conservatives win. What does that mean for the Premier of Ontario after what he's done and what his kind of senior advisors have done? So, the thing is he's a big factor. Doug Ford is a big factor in this campaign for the Conservatives, especially in Ontario.
Nick, for a Liberal leader, Mark Carney, I think the big open question posed by Conservatives is really how much different from Justin Trudeau is he?
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael. We talked about the vulnerability of Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives being almost like an internal party matter. Well, you know what? The vulnerability for Mark Carney is different, but is also an internal party matter. And I think among the most effective questions that Pierre Poilievre has posed to Mark Carney has related to, are you really any different than the previous government? And to try to get Carney to explain that a little more. And I think for Carney, although obviously he scores very well in terms of who people would prefer as prime minister, he scores well in terms of how the perceptions as to whether he would do a good job managing the relationship with Donald Trump, or a better job than Pierre Poilievre. I think the big question is he really different? Will the government be different? And you know what? The thing is, those are very fair questions to ask, especially in the context of the Liberal platform. The Liberal platform came out, and it wasn't a platform with less spending. It was a platform that actually included more spending and bigger deficits. So I think the vulnerability for Carney will be people wondering, will he really be different? And is he hostage to the same people that have been governing for the last 10 years? And then for Pierre Poilievre, it'll be like, what's up with the Conservatives fighting amongst themselves? And if Pierre Poilievre doesn't get a big endorsement from Doug Ford, what does that mean? What does Doug Ford know that Canadians don't know?
Hmm. Nick, well, we will see you on CTV for our election night special coverage. I bet we're all looking forward to it, and it'll be another exciting night as usual.
Super.